바티칸에 따르면 2020년 봉쇄와 방역 정책이 시작한 이래 목숨을 끊거나 악령에게 빙의되는 사람들이 늘고 있다고 합니다. 그래서 세계적으로 퇴마사에 대한 수요가 급증하고 있으며 바티칸은 엑소시스트 양성에 박차를 가하고 있다고 합니다.
The number of priests who perform exorcisms is on the rise. In 2005, there were 12 priests in the country trained in exorcism. Now there are more than 100.
During COVID, he says demand for exorcisms has skyrocketed. Tonight, Brian is visiting a client who says they are possessed. And Sister Mary Joan is coming along to administer the appropriate treatment.
I call this my go bags. This is actually my gear bag I used in law enforcement that I've repurposed for this.
There's a sword in there?
It's a dagger.
It's a dagger?
This is mostly used for ceremonial, but it is a
Okay.
blessed Templar dagger. And then plenty of holy water. And see, these are exorcised holy water. And then I've got blessed salt in here too. If we, God forbid, use all of our holy water, we can make more with exorcised salt.
In 2018, the Vatican released a statement saying the number of exorcisms carried out globally was rising. They stopped short of giving figures, but Brian believes there's thousands of exorcisms performed in the US each year.
오늘 방송에서는 엑소시즘에 대해 자세히 알아보도록 하겠습니다.
It's basically demons are fallen angels. That is, when they were originally created, they were created in a state of innocence. They were holy. They actually had sanctifying grace.
So satanic ritual abuse, without going into like lurid details to scandalize people,
Right.
what is it, and why are we seeing it in the Catholic Church amongst apostate or infiltrating false clerics, Judas priests?
Okay, yeah. First, what is it? So satanic ritual abuse is basically the name that is given to the practice of rituals or certain kinds of occult activity in relationship to usually a victim, usually their kids or women or such or the like. And so they'll actually abuse them in order to empower themselves in relationship to because they're using this ritual to gain power from Satan. It's done ritualistically, that is, the sexual acts or these kinds of things are done in a very specific ritual. Usually it's an inversion of some type of Catholic ritual. It's primarily done in order as a form of empowerment. This is one of the reasons why you're starting to see an uptick in it in the world elite. So it was in the 1980s that we saw a real uptick, a real drastic increase in the number of satanic ritual abuse cases. And that statistic, I think, still kind of bears itself out, although now it's becoming significantly even worse. But a lot of the people involved in this is not a conspiracy theory. You can read it right online. All you got to do, really, if you want to know who's involved in the occult, is just watch the opening of the tunnel that they did in Switzerland. All you got to do is watch the ceremony for that, and all these heads of states are watching this full-blown ritual to Baphomet. So it's not, this isn't something that's occult anymore in a certain sense. It's kind of out there, and we're starting to discover these things. But once in a while, as clergy are involved in it as well. And part of that is just, it's all about power and empowerment, ultimately. But we've noticed that there's two kinds of priests, those who were actually involved in it before. And that's actually one of the reasons they went into the priesthood, is because they were able to use even the priesthood itself by committing sacrilege in relationship to the sacraments. They have their own supply of hosts. They never had to steal them or anything like that, etc. And two, just a priest doing it is such a sacrilege that in their mind, it empowers them in relationship to the diabolic much more than, say, someone who's not. But we've also come across some priests who started out okay, but they usually had some kind of moral problem, usually in the area of the Sixth Commandment. And then by the time they get done, they get kind of sucked into the satanic. Yeah.
Speaking of that, Malachi Martin and others have talked about that at some point in the 60s, there was some sort of enthronement of Satan or diabolical infiltration. That something happened in the Vatican where you have Freemasons, occultists, whatever you want to call these people. They're definitely under the influence of Satan, enthroning Satan. Now, What does that mean? You know, you talk about people can be possessed, animals, right, can have demons in them, places,
Right.
homes. What does it mean
Right.
to enthrone?
Well, yeah. So basically, to enthrone Satan in a particular location basically means it's the inversion of, like, for example, the enthronement of the Sacred Heart or the Immaculate Heart. And so basically, what you're doing is you're setting him up as the ruler or king or principality or power in that particular location. And so you're doing a specific ritual which empowers him so that he can influence those in the region or in the area, basically.
And as I understand it, Satanists do this in all kinds of geographies, right? They're taking up space.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a couple of ways they do it. One is they do the enthronements. The other thing is they open up. It's very difficult. I've only seen it happen a few times in my own coming across these things personally. Doesn't mean they're not happening more often. It's just that I've only had to deal with them twice. And that is what they call opening up a portal, which is the inversion of a Catholic Church. So the Catholic Church is it's the gateway to heaven, right? And so from there, graces flow to the region or the area. And a portal is the inversion of that, where they do a particular kind of a ritual, and it empowers the demons to influence people in the area and in the region. And so it takes a certain level of individual involved in the occult to be able to pull that off.
I would, if I were Satan, I would want to be enthroned at the Vatican. That'd be my front
Yes.
row seat.
Yeah, exactly. And you know, that reference in Malachi Martin's books, there has been more than one source that has come out and confirmed what is contained in that book. Even the bishop in South Carolina, where the ritual took place, because it was done by a form of projection, even where the ritual took place, the bishop there did research, found out it was true, and then reconsecrated the church. So there is, because the information was in the archives, it would be naive, let me just put it this way, it would be naive for people in the church to not think that the primary target of the Satanists wouldn't be the Vatican.
Yeah, in war, you go for the capital city.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, I've heard not say Father Ripperger, but other exorcists have said, yes, something like this happened in the 60s. Would you want to comment on that or not?
We know something happened in the early 60s, and it's based primarily on what other exorcists had said. So if you listen to the exorcists talking, they talk about the fact that something happened in the life of the church in which the time it took to liberate people went from, usually once you got faculties, it was a day or two, sometimes a week. Those were pretty difficult. The case that was in St. Louis, originally starting in D.C., but ended up in outside of St. Louis, where they processed it, took 59 days, was almost unheard of in that day and age. But they would go very quickly. An exorcist said that something happened because it was like a light switch. It went from things, you just kick these demons out. It wasn't that much. I mean, you still had to do some work, but they got out pretty easily, and it didn't take that long to all of a sudden, boom, now it took 8 months to 2 years. But they say it's ex opere operantis ecclesiae, which is from the church that's doing it, right? So it's basically the state of the church will have an impact on how effective the exorcisms are actually going. We do know there's something in the church that seems to have resulted in it being somewhat compromised. It still has the authority from God. It still has these things. The demons still have to obey, etc. But there's something that's been somewhat compromised as a result, and as a result, it's taking us longer to get them out. And so, and in my experience, in all the cases I've ever had, the demons always appear as men. And whereas if they appear as a woman, it's because they're trying to seduce somebody, which they do from time to time in relationship to men.
Yeah. And I imagine, so you said the only time they manifest as female is seduced, but those would only be fallen angels.
That's correct.
So only fallen angels are trans.
That's yeah.
Did I get that right?
Well, and also what it does, it's very similar to the transgender situation, is it's simulation. It's not true. Mm-hmm. So that's what they're doing. They're simulating something that's not proper to their true characteristics.
Right. And can we go through the levels of diabolic influence and possession? I mean, obviously you would have someone like the Antichrist will be the most perfectly possessed
Yes.
person that has ever existed, because his will be perfectly, we assume, aligned with the will of the satanic. But, you know, you've got that, and then there's about, I think you have 6 levels of influence.
And it essentially consists in the demon's ability to introduce things into our imagination and affect us emotionally. The next level, the next 5 are what they call extraordinary. And they're extraordinary in 2 ways. One is they're not very common, and they're above and beyond what most people are going to experience. So the first level is, this is the prerogative of saints. It's when the saints would actually be attacked. So we saw this with Padre Pio or the Cure of Ars and the like. So these are the people that were actually attacked physically. The next one is diabolic oppression. This is where they attack people from the outside. So this is when they attack people's finances, their relationships, their job situation. They can cause problems with their property, destroying certain things. They can even cause death of animals and things of that sort under certain circumstances. Then the next one is diabolic obsession. That's where they attack the person's psychological faculties. They do it in the same way that they do ordinary temptation, except it's much more intense, it's much stronger. The person usually doesn't have the ability to kind of reason their way out of it or look at it from a different point of view. Diabolic obsession and oppression are drastically on the rise in our culture. Obsession, our primary way in which we're seeing an uptick in that is pornography and just lack of moral formation and people just leading their life according to their emotions. Possession is the next one, and that's where the demons actually take possession of a part of the body, unless they're perfectly possessed and it's the whole of the body. They take possession of part of the body, whereas most people are what we call partially possessed, and that basically means that the demons possess part of it, but it also means that the demons are only manifesting certain parts of the time, which they call periods of crisis, and then they go through periods of lucidity where the person's normal. So if you look at the case of the exorcism of Emily Rose, if you actually look at the books, Annalise Michel, who's actually the exorcism of Emily Rose is actually based on, she went through periods of lucidity and crisis. So during the periods of lucidity, she would spend hours in front of the Blessed Sacrament praying for the clergy at the time, because this was in the late 60s, early 70s when they were just going off the rails. And she was very sensitive to that. And so she actually offered up her possession for that purpose, for the clergy, for the conversion of the clergy.
Because she had multiple demons in her body, but she seemed that she was in a state of grace. That means the Holy Spirit is indwelling in her soul.
That's right, and she would receive communion on a regular basis. She was going to confession on a regular basis. She was obvious. I think she was much more spiritually advanced than a lot of times it's portrayed, because of the fact that she was extraordinarily sensitive to even just venial sin and things of this sort. So, so when you have more than one possessor, they're normally speaking going to possess just one part of the body, each going to possess a different part of the body. Then the last one is subjugation. That's where people make a pact with the devil. Most priests today do not have a philosophical understanding of what a pact actually is. But once you understand what a pact is, you realize that technically speaking, a demon cannot enter into a pact or contract, because there are certain requirements that he can't fulfill or meet. But they can convince us that we're under this contract, that we've entered into this pact to keep us subjugated to them. And so people who become perfect possessed are always subjugated because they've made a pact at some level with the demons. But not everybody who's made a pact is necessarily perfectly possessed.
And then subjugation is like the pact with the devil. And there's a lot of people who misunderstand this. They think if you sell your soul to the devil, you can never get it back.
That's correct.
That's not true, though.
No, it is not true at all. In fact, as I mentioned, technically speaking, demons can't enter into a contract.
Right.
All of the moralists always said you had to have a body in order to enter into a contract, and the reason being is because you have to have a body in order to fulfill the terms of the contract. Well, they don't have a body, so they can't fulfill the terms of the contract. There are instances where they can. They have been able to, and God permits them, such as the case of John Lennon.
Now, you just mentioned John Lennon. And I heard you say that before, so I did a little research, and you're right, Father. I looked into it. Do you want to tell the story about John Lennon and his possession?
But basically, John Lennon made a pact with the devil, and basically the devil told him 20 years. And then he was shot 20 years to the week, which I think you were the one who mentioned last time we were together, that was actually on, was it December 8th, right?
The Feast of the Immaculate Conception. John Lennon was shot on the Feast of the Immaculate Conception. That's right.
Yeah, and the guy that shot him had met him actually like a couple of days before, and then apparently they said the guy that shot him said, I don't know what happened, I just literally went out of my mind, and so basically it was I don't know if that guy was possessed. We do have a phenomenon which we call temporary possession, which I do talk about in the priest's version. So it could have been a case of that. But yeah, I mean,
well, it's interesting on that December 8th because down here in Texas, there's a super popular metal band called Pantera. Pantera, and their famous guitar player allegedly sold his soul to the devil, and his name was Dimebag Darrell. Anybody in the chat remember Dimebag Darrell? Anyway, he also was murdered, I believe, on stage by a fan on December 8th.
Yeah.
Same day that John Lennon was murdered by a fan, and both allegedly sold or made a pact with the devil.
Yeah.
So it's kind of strange that that both would be killed. Both makes a pact with the devil for musical talent. Both get musical talent, and then are killed by fans on December 8th, the Feast of Our Lady. I mean, are demons choosing that to mock Our Lady? I don't know exactly what's going on, but it's two cases with similarities in both.
It would be interesting to do a study along that line of how many people have made a pact with the devil that openly. So, and some of the people we actually know were possessed, like Jimi Hendrix would talk about how he was basically possessed on stage. Mm-hmm. So, and even some of the more modern artists have openly talked about it's not them on stage, right?
Well, especially if you sold your soul for fame. You want fame, you want to be famous, you want to have fans, and then a fan kills you.
Technically speaking, all you have to do is make a volitional choice to step out from underneath the pact, and boom, it's no longer in effect. In fact, it only remains in effect as long as the human agent continues to will it to be in effect. Because that's, once he says no, well, then it's not in effect. However, I tell people, okay, so stepping out from underneath the contract is one thing, or the pact, because it's not a true pact. But the effects might take a while to clean up because you've let the demon into your life, and now that he's gotten into those other areas of your life, it's going to take a while to clean him up out of that. But as far as it's not like getting your soul back. You just have to say, I renounce this pact. I have nothing to do with it, and then boom, that's it.
Yep. Infestation, as that's not one of the levels. That's just a different category.
And then infestation is what actually affects animals or buildings, or various forms of property, and so they can be infested. There's been several houses I've had to clean up. There's been 2 buildings that I've been in where there were that was literally palpable. You'd be physically attacked by these things. So they can infest buildings. Usually it's because there's been some particular evil that's occurred there. Although a lot of times people say, well, our house is infested, and then it's really not the house. About 80% of the time, it's actually somebody in the house is doing something, or the demon's attached to them, and then he's just kind of showing himself externally. So you clean up the people, and then the stuff in the house stops. But so they can get into houses, they can infest animals, they can afflict animals, and they can also be attached to objects. One of the things that you'll see from time to time, you can actually watch it right on YouTube, is you'll have people that say, oh, well, if the demons, if they possess the item, they're locked in the item, and then that way if you just keep the item, and then that way they can't influence other people. It's the exact opposite.
That sounds like a bad idea.
Yeah, and that's, I'm thinking of Ed and Warren Carroll, right? Who, or Carroll and Warren, what is their name again? Warren is their last name. But they have this museum, right? And they've got this doll there that's infested, and they're just like, oh, and they tell people, and I've heard other exorcists say this, which is just absurd. Well, as long as they're possessing this thing, the demon's locked into it. No. It has it's the inversion of a Catholic sacramental. It's like if we bless a miraculous metal and then put it on a particular property, it has a spiritual impact on the property. It's the same thing with this stuff. As long as that item is intact, the demon's empowered to use it to influence people around it. And so that's why you have to destroy the object in a very specific way. And then once it's done, then the demon loses the power.
시청해 주셔서 감사합니다.